Look at that. Look at the time. We're here for another AP Environmental Science lecture, and today we're going to kind of be going over and looking at and talking about populations. We already talked about some of this in class. And so I'm going to cover some of the things we didn't have time to cover in class the other day, and we'll kind of continue this on next week. So we're kind of getting everything out. There we go. A little bit better. All right. So, hi. Good to see you. I can't see you. You can see me. Anyway, so we kind of talked about the human population growth, where in the world populations are growing, why they're growing like that. We're kind of going to go through some things today. So, for example, what kinds of things with our population keep us from reaching carrying capacity as quickly as a fly, which we had talked about in class, where you could see if they were just allowed to reproduce and nothing killed off any of the eggs or the maggots. In a couple months, we'd have like 6 trillion flies. That does not sound like fun. But what about us? Why is it we don't have 6 trillion humans already? Why are we only at 7, almost 8 billion? Well, we're K-selected species, and remember, flies are R-selected. They can have 120 little eggs every time they reproduce, whereas for humans, we invest a lot of care and time into 1 or maybe 2 babies that take quite a long time to reach reproductive age, whereas something like a fly can reach reproductive age very quickly and will produce many offspring. And not all of those offspring survive. In fact, quite a few of them will die. And that's an R-selected species, and we talked about that and the difference between those and like the little survivorship curves that you can see for those. We're going to kind of start talking about the human population, and one of the things we have to really look at is how many people are on Earth and how do they live. And people all across the world live in different ways than we do. They have different stuff than we do. They bring in different amounts of money than we do. They have different access to food and water and healthcare than we do. And space is limited in a lot of these countries with high populations. So we're going to kind of be looking at that and see how different things affect how many children women have and like fertility rate in different parts of the world. So a population explosion is really anything that causes a population grow uncontrollably. So that happened during the baby boom, all the boomers. We saw a 78 million person increase within these 18 years. So there was all of a sudden tons and tons and tons and tons of people being born. Why? The war ended and people were coming home and they were happy to be there. But also at the same time, medicine was better. So more of these children were surviving. Like, I'm pretty sure I've told you, my grandmother was one of 9 children. So sadly, like 2, possibly 3 of her siblings didn't reach adulthood. 2 for sure did not. Maybe a third did not either. But after World War II, we started to see a really sharp increase in the quality of modern medicine. After that, we had a vaccine for polio. We started having like better hospitals and better trauma care. And so all these infants were surviving more. So that's why we saw this sharp increase in the population. So let's just kind of take a look at a graph and kind of interpret this. And we're looking at fertility rates in the United States. So the total fertility rate of women in the United States has gone through lots of changes from the 1900s to now. And the baby boom, we call that, is a period of high fertility rates, and the baby bust was after that. The fertility rate still is low, but when we look at populations, you can kind of see the baby boom echo, which would be like the boomers having kids. So when we look at like a population diagram or an age structure diagram, you can kind of see that too. And it's not that they're having tons of kids. It's just there's a lot of people there, and even if they have like 1 or 2 kids, you're going to see that impact. But so let's kind of think about what was going on historically at this time. In the early 1900s, you have people in the United States having a really high fertility rate. They're having lots of kids. Why? Because sadly, a lot of them would die to different diseases as children. And so people had lots and lots of children, and sadly, some of them did die. We saw that sort of drop off. There's, some sort of great depression going on at this time. And then we have the Second World War, not great, but then you see people come back and they're happy to be alive and like things are great and the economy was better and stuff. So people are having lots and lots and lots and lots of kids. Conditions were great for like regular Americans at the time. And then we started to see people not wanting to have kids. So there was like a baby bust. So what was going on then? Gosh, someone can correct me, but we've got like a Vietnam War, right? We've got another war going on in like the 60s, and there's the Korean War, right? If I'm not mistaken. And I always get those backwards, so sorry for messing that up. But there's a lot of social things going on at the time, and people were having fewer kids. People didn't want to have a family of 5, 6 kids. Nothing is wrong with that. But there's a lot of people who decided they don't want that. And people were thinking about that more. Children were surviving better, and people didn't want a very, very large family. There was a lot of cultural change going on in the 1970s. I don't know, I wasn't born. I'll have to ask somebody. And then in the 80s, there's another recession. Thanks, Ronald Reagan. Reaganomics. Okay, look into it. But yeah, there is a pretty bad recession in the 80s. And so, I don't know. This is my like Gen X-itude. Like, you can listen to some of the music there, like, and you can hear like people talking about this, or look at some of the cartoons and stuff. And you'll see people living in their cars. There's a bad recession, so people weren't having lots of kids. It wasn't a great time to have kids. People weren't able to afford things. That started to improve in the 90s. But that's also where you hear that depressing alt rock that I love. And I think about it like this: those people who are making that like really like heavy rock, they grew up in like the 80s during like a recession, and so they grew up like with like tough times. They made like kind of depressing music about it. But the economy started to pick up in like the 90s to the early 2000s before we had another incident. But the fertility rate of the United States, if we extended this out to today, is still right around replacement level, maybe a little bit below. So most people here in the United States are not having many, many, many children. On average, they're having, it depends, it changes. I've seen a lot of different material, and I think the last time I looked, it was like 1.8. So on average, people are having about 2 children per couple. That doesn't mean that every couple is having 2 children. It means some people are having many children, some people are having fewer, some people have none. So this baby bust, the reason this went down, here we can see, like I talked about the cultural reasons. People weren't getting married at 18. Like they weren't like, oh, come back from war, we're getting married. Woohoo. People were working or doing other things. Women started to really like enter the workforce a lot more seriously in the 50s and 60s. Like women took over jobs men were doing during World War II, and a lot of women liked working and they wanted to work and earn a paycheck. So more and more women were working and not getting married immediately after high school. So they weren't having babies right away. They were choosing not to, or using contraception. So that's another reason why people were having fewer and fewer children. It was like a conscious choice to have less children. So we can kind of see here, I know my head's in the way. Sorry. In 2006, the total fertility rate was around 2.1. I told you I've seen a couple different things. Right now, it's about 1.86. I've seen different things. And we can look at this little lovely color diagram where it's green. You have like above replacement level. And as you go towards red, you have fewer and fewer than replacement level. And we have all the data here. So if you want to take a look at this, it's posted up there for you to take a look at the different fertility rates per state. And there could be a lot of factors why that's happening. So let's take a look. Sorry, I know my head's in the way. I gotta find a better place for my head. Maybe just not have it. You know. So we're looking at the difference between 1900 and 2000. So a 100-year difference. Um, and then I want you to think about what are the most important changes in terms of population change that have happened that would affect this population change the most. So take a look at life expectancy. In 100 years, we added 30 years to life expectancy. That's pretty crazy. And this is lower not because everybody was dying at 47. It was lower because you had to factor in it was much more common for children to die at a young age from diseases that now we have vaccines for that are preventable. Most women did not work at home. Most people were not high school graduates. Oh, thank God. Most homes did not have a flushing toilet. Oh no. I'm glad. And most homes didn't have electricity. Actually, in like the World's Fair in 1901, Buffalo, New York, was called the City of Light. That's where I'm from. That's why I know. Because they lit up the city with electric power from Niagara Falls, from the hydroelectric power plant that was built there. So electricity was kind of a new cool thing in 1900, and now it's like everybody has it. Um, Most people did not live in suburbs. You had most people living in rural areas around farms. Like a lot of people were subsistence farmers. This is adjusted for inflation. People would make about $3 an hour compared to 15 at a manufacturing job. This has probably increased from 2000. It's 2020. It's definitely increased per hour. And homicides were a lot less. There was fewer people, and less people living in the cities, less crowding, less bumping into each other, and that sort of thing still happened. So looking at these changes, you can kind of see what factored into changes in fertility rate and why people would be having fewer children. We've had a lot of advancements in the last 100 years. My father-in-law, who passed away this past year, he was born in the 1920s, and he had seen a lot of different things change over his lifetime. Imagine how many things are going to change in your lifetime. Imagine how many things have already changed. Like I know I tell you guys I'm old. I'm not that old, but when I was your age, people didn't have these. Like especially not a smartphone. Some people did have cell phones, but they were like a track phone, and you had watt minutes on a card. Um, so now people carry around a personal computer with them. Pretty much most people have them. And you have access to all the information ever, all of human information right at your fingertips, pretty much all day, every day. That wasn't like that when I was your age. You could get onto a computer and you had the internet, but it was kind of the wild west of the internet. Things were a little bit different then than they are now. That's a story for another day. We don't even have time to go into that. And then we can see the population of the United States has continued to grow in the last 70 years because of births and immigration. So we can see like there's been people being born, population's going to go up, immigration has increased recently. So think about what factors influence whether a woman has a child or not, and that's going to help us understand fertility rate. So those factors include how many storks visit your area. Not really. Well, the cost of having a child and raising them. Holy cow, that's gone up a lot. You can ask your parents. They probably might have a perspective for you how much it would cost to put a child in daycare. And that also depends on where you live. Like here it would be different than if you lived in like a larger city. And sending them to a school, like maybe if people want to send their child to a private school or they want to help them go through college. The cost of college has increased since I've been in college. All of these costs continue to go up. The cost of food and clothes and anything else you want to do with your child, taking them to various sports or dance or whatever they like to do. I know this is like a difficult thing to talk about, so like, don't feel uncomfortable. But in the last 50, 60, 70 years, the availability of contraception, including birth control, has gone up, and the availability and decreased stigma of people having abortions has caused people to have fewer children. more women are educated, so they feel like, maybe I don't want to be a mom or that to be my only thing. I want to work, or I'm going to work for a while before I have kids. And maybe now I'm like, oh, I'm like 30, I can't really be having too many kids. I'm getting a little bit older. Maybe I'll have one child instead of having three or four. Or like pension, or moving to a bigger city, where, maybe if this was 1900 and you lived on a farm, maybe it would help to have 5 or 6 children so they could also help with chores on the farm and provide for themselves. Um, Thankfully, there's fewer and fewer infant deaths, so people are having fewer children because they are going to survive. And the age of people marrying and having children has increased. So you don't have someone who's like 17 or 18, getting ready to get married and immediately have a child. People aren't getting married until they're 25, 26, not having children until they're 28, 29, 30. And that's fine, but that just means because you are having children later in life, you're less likely to have more children, because women can only have children but till they reach menopause. So birth rates are usually lower, much lower, in urban areas than rural areas. Cities have different educational opportunities. There's less room for children. Children are an expense, and it's more expensive to live in an urban area than it is to live in a rural area. And what about death rates? Because remember, population is going to grow and fluctuate based on birth rates and death rates. That's like a natural change in population. You can also include immigration and emigration, but that's not like a natural population growth. So death rates in the developed world, in industrialized nations like the United States, have declined. Why? We have better access to food and better nutrition. So we have food, and it's good food. Well, don't eat that processed stuff. We have access to good, healthy, nutritious food. There have been advances in medicine that are causing people to live longer, healthier lives. We have good sanitation and personal hygiene. People wash their hands a lot more now lately than they had in the past, I think. And we have like ways that we clean and process our water and trash and take that away from us. And the water supply is safer. We don't have like outbreaks of different diseases because of stagnant water. We have water treatment plants. And this is something that we've talked about. We talked about those 8 structure diagrams. So I'm going to skip away from there. Look at that. We're already here. I'm going to talk about demographic stages in different countries. If you look back at the notes I gave you, the video that's right before this really fits along well with this. I cannot recommend enough that you watch these videos. They're actually really good. And like that video described, which I can't play here probably for copyright reasons, as countries become industrialized, their birth rates decline. And we've kind of mentioned why. But let's kind of look at this. So, different factors can influence population size. So we can have this demographic transition. As countries become more economically developed, like more industrialized, for example, their birth and death rates decline. And so we're kind of going to go through these stages. The pre-industrial stage, where there's little population growth because there's high infant mortality. There's also high just mortality rates. Okay, people aren't living that long, and sadly, there's a high rate of infant death. Then the people can go into this transitional stage where industrialization begins. There starts to be better infrastructure, better government that's actually going to work for the people. And the death rate drops because they have better access to food, water, medicine. But the birth rates still remain high. So people are still having tons of kids, but good thing, those infants aren't dying at a high rate because they have better access to food, medicine, clean water, and other things. And then there's the industrial stage where the birth rate starts to drop, where women are having fewer children because infants are surviving. Women are having jobs and maybe delaying having kids. And it's going to start to approach the death rate. So the population is still growing. And then we have the post-industrial stage where a lot of European countries are currently where the birth rate is equal to or less than the death rate, where you might even see a decline in population, so the population starts to level out. So we can kind of look at this. This is like a generalized transition model. So we can see like the population size overall, and then we can see how it changes from pre-industrial, transitional, industrial, and post-industrial. So pre-industrial, we have a low growth rate because if you see here, the birth and death rates are kind of equal, and it's because brain. Thank you. We see high infant mortality, so that's why we see like this low growth. Then as we transition and these countries and people are getting access to better medicine, people are living longer and there's a low infant death rate, so we start to see this population explosion. And then as they reach the industrial stage, people are having fewer and fewer children, but people are still having children and the death rate is kind of low, so the population is going to increase. And the post-industrial is when you start to see that carrying capacity or even a drop-off where the population will decrease, because birth rate might go below replacement level. So this is just graphically representing what I just showed you in the last slide. So in a pre-industrial country, in a state, there's harsh living conditions, there's high birth rate, high death rate, and there's low population growth because birth and death rates are close to equal. Then when we transition, food production rises, healthcare improves, so children aren't dying, yay, and people are living longer, yay, but the birth rate remains high, so we see a huge explosion in population. And then once this industrial stage is reached, industrialization is widespread, so we still have access to food, water, medicine, everything's going along smoother, people can save a little bit of money, and people are working more. So the birth rate goes down, and it starts to approach the death rate. And that's because of better access to birth control, decline in infant mortality, increased job availability for women, and there's a cost of raising children who don't enter the workforce or until after high school or college. So there's the cost associated with raising the child. And then we have post-industrial, where you could consider that you'd be the United States, and there's other countries in Europe that are like this, like Germany, Italy. The birth rate declines even further, equaling the death rate, and so you end up having zero population growth, or you could have a negative population growth if people are not, if the birth rate is below the replacement rate. Then the birth rate falls below the death rate and the total population size slowly decreases. 37 different countries have reached this stage, and mostly are in Western Europe. So for population and demographers, the challenge is to get the rest of the world to this state. Why? Because the population of the world is growing, and eventually we're going to run out of resources, or there's going to be a large fight over resources like food, water, space, access to fuel, for example. And so we want other countries to reach this post-industrial state. We want them to have access to healthcare and food and medicine, and eventually bring the population of the world into where it can reach carrying capacity, where we can all survive and have enough access to resources, and that would be just lovely. Oh yeah, I recommend that you guys watch this video, and we'll kind of pick up from here in class, but totally watch this. It's with that guy Hans. He is so cool, and he talks about all this great stuff dealing with population change and everything, and kind of helps you visualize it a little bit better, and talks about moving parts of the world to that industrial and post-industrial state, so that way we can see a leveling off of population, so we don't have this overpopulation of the world. So I hope it helps. You know, just ask if you have questions, send me a message, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.